Hello, you're watching Shalom World News. I'm Donna Villa from Chicago, Illinois. Here are the latest headlines from around the world. U.S. bishops reiterated their call for peace in the Holy Land over the weekend after the news that 2 Christian women were killed by Israeli troops at the Holy Family Parish in Gaza. The 2 killed were identified as Nahida Khalil Anton and her daughter Samar. Archbishop Timothy Broglio, president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, called for an immediate cessation of all hostilities and the release of hostages. A statement released by the Latin Patriarchate of Jerusalem said that several people were shot without any notification or warning. The IDF has denied these charges. Elsewhere, Cardinal Vincent Nichols, the leader of the UK's Roman Catholics, said he was, quote, heartbroken, end quote, over the attack that left 2 women dead. In another significant development, Israel's defense minister Yoav Gallant said the nation will gradually transition to the next phase of operations in Gaza following talks with the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin about lower intensity combat and ways to reduce harm to civilians. Rights groups claim that Iran started carrying out executions of activists and members of ethnic minorities. The Tehrani regime has executed at least 229 people targeting protesters in response to uprising triggered by Mahsa Amini's death in the morality police's custody in September 2022. In November, the United Nations issued a warning about Iran's acceleration of executions, describing it as, quote, alarming, end quote. According to the agency, at least 419 individuals received death sentences within the initial 7 months of the year, marking a 30% increase compared to the same period in 2022. Notably, Kurdish and Baluchi minorities bore the brunt of these executions. Iran Human Rights, a Norwegian organization, said that there were 604 executions in the first 10 months of this year, the highest number in 8 years. In a troubling development, a Canadian teenager in Ottawa has been arrested and charged with conspiring to carry out a terrorist attack involving explosives against Jewish targets in the nation's capital. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police made the arrest, citing charges of facilitating terrorist activity by sharing instructional material related to explosive substances. The youth is also accused of knowingly instructing someone to carry out a terrorist activity, specifically targeting Jewish individuals. The suspect, whose identity remains undisclosed due to their minor status, appeared in an Ottawa courthouse and has been detained until the next court appearance. This incident has raised significant concerns, with the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs describing it as a, quote, staggering development of unchecked anti-Semitism, end quote, in the country. The organization noted the escalating anti-Semitic incitement in Canada since the recent Hamas attack in Israel. Pope Francis has officially approved a document that permits priests to bless same-sex couples or couples in irregular situations. The new document, Fiducia Supplicans, emphasizes that those seeking God's love and mercy should not undergo extensive moral analysis to obtain it. At the same time, the statement also clarified that this blessing, which may only be given spontaneously and not in the context of a formal liturgical rite, does not mean condoning their sexual relations, stating that, quote, a blessing offers people a means to increase their trust in God, end quote. The document asserted that the Church stands firm in its stance that marriage is a lifelong sacrament between a man and a woman. A landmark national security trial opened Monday, December 18, in Hong Kong for prominent activist and media giant Jimmy Lai. He was detained for breaking the controversial national security law imposed by the Chinese government, which restricted free speech in the region. Lai, a vocal supporter of democratic freedom and human rights in Hong Kong, was accused of plotting with foreign forces to release seditious materials. If found guilty, he could be sentenced for life imprisonment. The trial is expected to last for 80 days. Meanwhile, a congressional commission is calling on the U.S. government to impose sanctions on Hong Kong judges and prosecutors if they refuse to free Jimmy Lai. The Nicaraguan priest sent into exile to the Vatican by Daniel Ortega's regime celebrated the Holy Eucharist. The priests celebrated the Mass at the Basilica di Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome on Saturday, December 16. The 12 Catholic priests who were held captive by the Nicaraguan government were released following a deal struck between President Daniel Ortega and the Holy See in October. The photographs of the Nicaraguan priests wearing pink chasuble at the basilica were taken by Spanish journalist Rodrigo Moreno. Journalist Israel Gonzalez Espinosa released the photos of the Nicaraguan priests on the social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter. Livia Bal, a retired scientist and volunteer for a charity in the UK, has filed a legal complaint against officials for forcing her to leave a public street where she was standing and praying quietly merely because she held a sign which offered help to pregnant women. Bal had been promoting charitable assistance to women facing crisis pregnancies. She was confronted by 3 policemen who said she had violated the local containment zone, which forbids expressing support or opposition to abortion. Alliance Defending Freedom UK, in defense of Bal, claimed that she was outside the limits of the buffer zone and away from abortion center when the officers stopped her. The Myanmar Supreme Court rejected a special appeal filed by the country's deposed leader Aung San Suu Kyi, which challenged her conviction in a corruption case. She was accused of accepting thousands of dollars and gold as bribe from a former political colleague. This verdict follows her 5-year prison sentence from April last year when she was found guilty of bribery. On February 1, 2021, Suu Kyi was taken into custody after the military overthrew her elected government. Her supporters and outside analysts claim that the charges against her were made up to discredit her and justify the military's takeover of power. She is currently serving terms totaling 27 years in jail. New York lawmakers introduced a bill that requires food services along the New York State Thruway rest stops to stay open for all 7 days of the week. The proposed legislation directly affects the restaurant chain Chick-fil-A's policy of remaining closed on Sundays, a tradition pioneered by its founder and a Christian, Truett Cathy, ever since it opened its first restaurant in Georgia in 1946. The bill dictates that publicly owned service areas should use their space to maximally benefit the public, as it will be inconvenient for travelers when a retail space in a publicly owned service area stays unused for a particular day of the week. The new bill would now affect the restaurant chain as it has locations at rest stops along Interstate 90 in New York State. At least 116 people were killed and 220 injured after a 6.2 magnitude earthquake shook China's Gansu province. The quake also impacted the nearby city of Qinghai. Thousands of rescuers are assisting people in the high-altitude location despite freezing weather conditions. A few hours later, a second wave with a magnitude of 5.5 hit Xinjiang. It is still unknown how much damage the second earthquake has caused. However, President Xi Jinping has ordered full rescue operations to Gansu, with Jishishan County seeming to be the worst affected region. The interruption of water and power supplies has made rescue operations quite challenging. The United Nations Women's Division is urging the international community to assist Afghan women and girls in their fight against the Taliban. Amnesty International has also criticized the world at large for being quiet on human rights atrocities in Afghanistan, particularly the Taliban's infringement of women's rights. The Taliban has restricted women's education, employment, and access to fundamental rights, thus excluding them from public life. They are imprisoning Afghan women in the name of protecting them from gender-based abuse. Meanwhile, women tend to be increasingly frightened in seeking formal justice for fear of being detained. Scholas Occurrentes, an international Pontifical Foundation initiated by Pope Francis, has been awarded with the prestigious human rights accolade, the Juan Carrillo Salcedo Award. The recognition presented by Spain's University of Seville lauded the organization's efforts in safeguarding human rights. This honor, awarded biannually, acknowledges individuals or groups that have championed human rights in political, social, and educational domains. The jury praised Scholas Occurrentes for its praiseworthy endeavors in protecting the human rights of young people globally, as well as its innovative and tangible practices which enable all young people to lead significant lives. The award comes as a double delight to Scholas Occurrentes, which celebrates its 10th year anniversary. And those are your latest headlines. Do join us tomorrow. In the meantime, you can visit swnews.org for more updates. Shalom.